Hello there, you're welcome to Hillcop TV. My name is Collins Nanaya Abebrese. So, in today's video or lesson, we are going to take a look at the British interference in local politics of the Gold Coast, and we shall look at Sir George McLean's administration and then also the achievement of Sir Captain George McLean in the Gold Coast. Now, before we begin with our lessons for today, I would like us to remind ourselves about what we learned the last time we met. And in case you missed out that video, I'll include a link, or you can check on the page and you get access to that video. Now, we looked at Charles McCarthy's war with the Ashanti, and we saw that one of the issues that Sir Charles McCarthy was confronted with was, bringing peace to the colonies, that is Ashanti and the Gold Coast, so that trade could prevail. And McCarthy chose to do that by going to war against the Ashanti, in trying to subdue them and keeping them quiet. And then, he thought that peace would then prevail afterwards. But then the unfortunate happened, and McCarthy was killed, and his head was cut and sent to Kumasi as war relic. And so we said that war really demoralized the British, and they left the Gold Coast after coming back in 1826 in the Dodowa War to take a revenge on the Insabanko War of 1824. And so after 1826, the Dodowa War, when the British gained revenge from the Ashanti, the British Parliament then recommended that the Queen or the monarch leaves the Gold Coast. So by 1826, the British had left the Gold Coast for good. They considered the Gold Coast as a place not favorable for trading and governance. And these were the two most important reasons for the coming of the Europeans. And so by 1826, after the Dodowa War, the Gold Coast, the British left the Gold Coast for good. Now, when they were leaving, we said that their fort and castles along the coast were handed over to the merchants or the traders, those who had come to trade from Britain. So the fort and castles were left in their care. Now, the Council of Merchants, the traders, they appointed Captain George McLean as their president to lead them to trade with the indigenous people, Ashanti and the Gold Coast. Now, McLean was warned by the British government not to interfere in the local politics of the people, that is, making laws for them, interfering in their politics. McLean was cautioned by the British government not to actually interfere. And so today we are looking at McLean's administration after the British had left the Gold Coast and had branded the Gold Coast as a place not favorable for governance and politics. Governance and trading. What next when McLean came into scene? What did he also do? And that is what basically we are looking at, McLean's administration, and then we'll look at the achievement of McLean. So let's dive into our lesson objectives. But then I would like to remind you to subscribe to our channel if you have not done so. So let's begin with our objectives. So the first lesson objective is for us to be able to outline the roles played by George McLean in the growth of British influence in Ghana. So I have already indicated that after 1826, the British left the Gold Coast. After the Dodowa War, they left the Gold Coast. And so they lost influence, in the Gold Coast. Now, the activities of McLean came to play a certain role that that led to the growth of this British influence. So their influence came back, after McLean came. So, what are the roles that he played, in ensuring that the British influence, came back? Good. Now, the next one is state the terms of the 1831 peace treaty. Now, this peace treaty was signed between George McLean and the Gold Coasters, as well as the Ashantis. And so we should be able to state the terms, the clauses, the agreements, okay, in the 1931 peace treaty. Now, all these are the same thing. Then also identify the methods used by McLean to extend the British authority in the states of Ghana. So, as I have earlier indicated, the British influence diminished after they lost in the Insamanko War of 1824. Then they came back in 1826 for a revenge, and after that they left the Gold Coast for good. But then McLean came into the scene as the president of the Council of Merchants, and then brought about certain, methods or measures that extended the British authority or influence once again on the states in Ghana. And the states here are talking about the Dangerous, the Ashanti, the Adansi, the Achim, and all of that. So let's dive into the our introduction. Okay, so this is the man we called McLean. So this is the man that we are talking about. We've got Captain George McLean. Yeah, and this is the grave of George McLean, which was excavated some time back in the Cape Coast Castle, together with his wife, and the other one is an African, Philip Kweku. All right. So let's begin. Now that we know who we are talking about, let's begin our discussions with who George McLean was. So George McLean was appointed as the president of the Council of Merchants in October 1829, as I already indicated. Now, he arrived in the Gold Coast in 1830, and he remained in the Gold Coast till he died in 1847, which means that he spent barely 20 years, for not more than 20 years in the Gold Coast. So he died in 1847, arrived in the Gold Coast in 1830, and was appointed the president of the Council of Merchants in 1829. Now, one thing about Captain McLean was that he laid the foundation for a successful takeover of the Gold Coast by the British government from 1843 to 1957. So, had it not been McLean's activities that we are about to look at, the history of the Gold Coast would have been different. Now, how different would it have been? As I indicated earlier, the British left for good, and I don't think they were planning to come back, because Ashantis had succeeded in pushing back for the British not to even think of colonizing the Gold Coast, because they felt that there was too much war, instability in the region, and they were not ready to actually go that way. So, had it not been McLean who laid a successful foundations, which we are going to take a look at, things would have been different. And so he was the one who actually laid the foundation for the British to come in again and take over and rule the country up until 1957, when the independence was finally given to the Gold Coast. And we shall take a look at what he did, precisely. Now, upon arrival, peace had not been made between Ashanti and the southern states. Now, McLean realized that there could not be trade and stability without peace. Now, bear in mind that at this period, the trans-Saharan trade had been abolished and legitimate trade had been introduced. And so the role of McLean coming in here is purposely to ensure that the people or the British traded with the local people in commodities other than slaves. So they were traded in commodities like granite, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, and stuff like that. Now, McLean, as president of the Council of Merchants, there was still no peace as it was during the time of McCarthy. And so trade could actually not go on because there is no peace and stability people feared for their life. People would not go out to trade, you understand, because there was this, wars, Ashanti and the British here and there, Ashantis attacking the southern states here and there. And so peace was actually nowhere to be found. And McLean felt that this could not have happened. I mean, trade couldn't have happened if there is no what? Peace. So this is what then he decided to do. Now, even though the Committee of Merchants had been instructed by the British government not to interfere in the affairs of the people outside the fort and castles, McLean began to involve himself actively in what? In local affairs. Why do you think that McLean actively involved himself in local politics or affairs? Things happening in the Gold Coast. Politically, McLean involved himself in it, even though he had been warned not to interfere. So why? As I earlier indicated, the reason is simple. He is here to encourage trade among his people, the British, and the local people, the Gold Coasters and the Ashantis. Now here he is faced with a problem of conflict here and there, instability here and there. So how can he possibly trade or create a conducive atmosphere for his people to trade with the local people? And that was a challenge. That was his major challenge. The same thing also applied to McCarthy, who chose to go to war with the Ashanti. However, McLean did not choose war. He chose the following activities or things that we are going to talk about. The role that he played in ensuring that peace and British influence, was extended. So let's look at what McLean chose to do. Now, the first thing that he chose to do was that Captain George McLean signed a peace treaty in 1831. Now, this treaty was referred to as the Tripartite Treaty. So he had to sign a treaty with the parties. Now, Tripartite Treaty means the treaty was signed between three parties, tripartite, so tripartite, three parties. Now, the first party would be, of course, which people? The Ashanti, right? Yes. The other party will be the southern state. That's the Gold Coast proper. Bear in mind that Ashanti is different from Gold Coast. Ashanti is not Gold Coast. So the Gold Coast, and that's the southern state. Then the British. So these three parties, the British, the Gold Coast, and Ashanti, signed the treaty in 1831. Now, this was a clear breach of what McLean was instructed to do. Now, he signed a treaty with these people without gaining or having any legal authority from the British government to sign treaties with the local chiefs in the Gold Coast. And that was a clear breach of what he was instructed to do. But he also had nothing to do. He could not do anything other than do this to ensure that peace prevailed. So let's take a look at the terms of the treaty of 1831. Now, the first term of the treaty of 1831, first term or agreement was that Denchira, Asin, Wasa, Fante, Chufo, Nzima, and Cape Coast, and other southern states, whom the Ashanti regarded as their vassals, were to be free and trade was to be encouraged. So all these states that you find there were vassal states to Ashanti. Ashantis regarded these states as part of them. So vassal state simply means conquered state. So all these states had been conquered by Ashanti, and the kings or chiefs in this state were paying homage to the Ashanti. And these areas or territories were part of the Ashanti kingdom. You understand? They were known as the provincial Ashanti. The metropolitan Ashanti is the Kumasi proper. So all these areas were part of the Ashanti kingdom, and they were under the jurisdiction of Ashanti. And so the many wars that were fought between these states and the Ashanti was basically because some of these states wanted to assert their independence, and anytime they do so, Ashanti would attack them. And so that was the cause of these frequent wars. and political wise. So the British felt that Asante must give independence or free these people, or to regard these people as not their vassal states anymore. Meaning Ashanti should give freedom to Denchira, Asin, Wasa, Kwifo, Nzima, and Cape Coast. So in essence, Ashantis really were forced to give out some of their lands and also to give independence to some people, even before the country Ghana gained independence in 1957. So that was the first treaty, and trade was to be encouraged between Ashanti and the local people, and the southern states. Now, also, all quarrels were to be referred to the British for peaceful settlement. So, if Ashantis had any issue with any of these vassal states, I believe the British felt that it should be sent to them instead of going at these people waging wars at these people. It should be settled by the British peacefully. Now, let's look at the next one. As part of the treaty, McLean asked the Asante to surrender 2 Asante princes as hostages and to pay 600 ounces of gold, which was to be returned after 6 years if Asante kept the treaty. The 2 Asante princes who were sent were Owusu Ansa and Owusu Nkwantabisa. Now, McLean did not trust Asante to keep this treaty. In fact, this is not the first treaty signed between the Asante and the British. So McLean did not trust Asantes, and so he felt that Ashantis were to surrender 2 of their princes in the person of Owusu Ansa and Owusu Nkwantabisa, and also present 600 ounces of gold. Now, these 2 things, the princes and the gold, were not going to be spent by the British. So the gold, for instance, were going to be kept in there. If Asantis were to obey these, treaties or terms, then all these things will be returned back to them, both the princes and the gold. And if we read further, you know that Owusu Ansa and Owusu Nkwantabisa were taken abroad to study, were taken to UK to study, all right, and they came back as educated people. And also after 6 years, the 600 ounces of gold were also returned to the Ashanti because they kept the treaty. Now let's take a look at the next term of the treaty. For their part, the coastal states promised to keep open the trade routes and to allow the Ashanti and other people from the interior to trade with anyone they liked. They also promised to respect the Asante. Yes, and if you have been following our lessons, we have talked about the reasons for the Asante wars, and one of them was one economic reason had to do with trade. Ashanti traders wanted to trade directly with the Europeans who were located along the coast. However, the Afantes, who were middlemen in that trade, refused to allow that, and so also constantly Asantes were invading these southern states in order to allow their traders to have direct access to the coast to trade with the Europeans. So you realize that on the part of the southern state as well, they were supposed to respect the Asante because some of them were not respecting the Asante. So when you look at the let me see. Okay, so we still have some of the terms. Both Asante and the coastal states also agreed to stop panyaring, for that's capturing and selling into slave, human sacrifice, and also other cruel customs. So panyaring were also agreed by both Asante and for southern state to stop. And so the panyaring, what simply means when I'm owing somebody and I'm not able to pay, then I sent somebody to go and work, to defray that debt. Now, let's analyze these achievements very carefully. These terms or agreement very carefully. You realize that the treaty was signed between 3 people, and so some of the agreements are geared towards one party. Now, Denchira, Asin, and blah 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 were to remain free Now, which people do you think were supposed to do this, or were this forgiven? Of course, it was given to the Ashanti people, right? Now, all quarrels were to be referred to the British. Which people? I think all the two parties, Ashanti and the Gold Coast. As part of it, Ashanti was also to, of course, present these two. That is also had to do with, I think, Ashanti. Then the Gosta people, on the other hand, or the Gold Coast, also had this as an agreement. Then the both of them, Ashanti and the Gold Coast, also agreed with this one. Good. So this is the 1831 peace treaty. So one achievement of McLean was that he signed the 1831 peace treaty, and indeed this treaty proved very, very, very key in ensuring that there was peace in the Gold Coast. Now let's further look at the achievements of McLean. After signing the treaty, he also promoted peace and stability, and owing to the political and judicial work being done by McLean as a result of the friendly relation he established with Asante, peace and order prevailed for the first time in a long period. This encouraged trading activities along the coast. So Asantes obeyed the 1831 treaty, and of course peace prevailed for a very long time, and that promoted a lot of trade. And so because of that, it promoted trade. McLean was able to promote trade, what McCarthy could not do. He was able to do so. And so when you look at the document, it says this made many British traders to return and export from the British forts. This increased from £90,000 in 1830 to £325,000 in 1840, whilst import also rose from £131,000 to £422,170 over the same period. So because of the activities of McLean, of course, trade was promoted. Again, McLean also encouraged missionary activities. All right. So McLean also helped to spread for Christianity and European education. At the time he held office, the Wesleyan missions began its work in the Gold Coast. All right. And McLean gave a great help to the missionary. For example, McLean provided a temporary accommodation at the Cape Coast Castle for the first missionaries of the Wesleyan missions, Reverend Joseph Downwell, when he arrived in the Gold Coast in 1834. And those Methodist people will know the work of Joseph Downwell. And so, he also encouraged missionary activities. Let's look at more of McLean's achievement. He also suppressed certain barbaric practices. Okay, so he suppressed the slave trade, which at this point the British were spearheading or championing the suppression of the slave trade. However, some people think that he refused to attack domestic slavery, that is the slavery that Africans were already into in our house, because he felt that it was part of the social structure of the people, and so there was no need. And there were even instances where McLean sent an army against certain chiefs who were part of the slave trade, who were still engaging in the slave trade. An example of such king was the king of Nzima, Kweku Aka, for indulging in the slave trade and human sacrifices. And this is one of the areas that the British really did well, the issue of human sacrifices. He also established a police system. All these were done to ensure that there was peace. He also established a police system. About 60 local people were recruited to form the National Corps. They were stationed at a number of posts set up in the southern states, just to ensure that as people trade, there will be a peace. And I think that it is high time we also see police, for personnel at advantage points in this country, to ensure that, of course, there is peace in everywhere. So he also established a police system, also being one of the achievements. So as a result of the policies followed by McLean, his influence extended over the southern states, and through this, the British acquired an influence over the affairs of these states, which were regarded as forming the protectorate. Now, the protectorate extended about 150 miles along the coast and 80 miles inland in McLean's time. So that is that. So McLean was able to do all of this. and he was able to have power over these states, and therefore even the areas that were seen as protectorate were extended. Now let's look at something else. Now there was an opposition to McLean because we all know that what McLean is doing is illegal. He has no legal backing. Now, despite the success and the benefits of McLean's activities, they clearly went beyond his legal powers and depended on his personal popularity and moral influence. Some of the British traders, at the quote, sent in reports to the British in the UK. Now, he was accused of extending the exercise of the British authority illegal. The British Parliament set up a committee to investigate the allegations levied against him. Now, don't forget, he was not asked to do so, and he did it. Now, based on the recommendation of the committee, McLean's jurisdiction had no, so the committee set up to investigate said that McLean had no jurisdiction or legal jurisdiction. McLean's jurisdiction had no legal basis. Hence, a new governor was appointed in the person of Commander Hill, who was appointed in 1843, and George McLean was then given the post of a judicial assessor to continue his work as a judge, because McLean was able to settle a lot of the conflicts that were happening at that time, and so he was still given the work to do, to be a judicial assessor, to adjudicate issues, whilst a new governor was appointed by the British. Now, a new governor was appointed because the British committee also recommended that the British government assume direct administration of the forts and castles in the Gold Coast once again. They left, but due to the work of McLean, it gave them some kind of confidence to come back again to assume the direct administration, whereby the Queen will send a representative to begin to colonize the people once again, all owing to the work of George McLean. So he died in 1847, and he was buried at the Cape Coast Castle, right in the castle, at the forecourt of the castle. Yeah, so I think this is where we will bring our discussions to. We will bring our discussions to an end. You can try your hand on this question. This is a WASSCE question 2019. Outline 4 roles played by George McLean. So you can talk of any of the roles that we have talked about. Good. So thank you for your time, and do not forget to share, like, and subscribe. Have a nice day. Bye bye.